Once again, the world might fall prey to an ancient evil. Once again, we're hurled in darkness and great upheaval. I forgot the rest.
Headshot cam. How sound.
First of all, it's the ghost of the Var who came back from the grave to haunt me.
Yes, I've come from the grave of the interwebs.
You can't be here. You're dead. I killed you. Yes, it's been a couple of weeks since your, shall we say, computer snafu.
Yeah, the technical difficulties.
Indeed, but here we are again with a long overdue video that nobody saw coming. And by that I mean the exact opposite of that. Especially if you follow me on Twitter, I have been tweeting non-stop about this game, which was, let's just say, a revelation for little old me. So, a few weeks ago I noticed that there was a free trial available on PlayStation 4 for Final Fantasy XIV Online A Real Reborn, Stormblood, and however many titles it has at this point. So I decided to give it a whirl, as it were. The rest is history, as they say, and by that I mean I fell hopelessly addicted to it. I enjoyed it. Hey, elf Dustin Helffman, see you later. That's
Your
the
world's
most
been destroyed.
important part of this whole experience, is that I enjoyed it. So as soon as the game begins, I am greeted by this cutscene, this very well realized cutscene, which I eventually found out it's actually a edited and heavily cut down version of the real introduction sequence for this game, which is about 8 minutes long, and I have included in its entirety at the very end of this video.
Right.
I had to, because that introduction is the greatest piece of media to ever come out of this franchise. It's really, really that good. It tells a complete story without dialogue. It relays said story entirely through spectacular cinematic action. So that's worth watching in its entirety, and sans commentary, but that comes later on. Welcome back to MADPlay, that's a long overdue introduction as well. I am your host, Madhog Diemaster, joined by the Ghost of the Var Archvarone, and we are playing / commenting on Final Fantasy XIV A Real Reborn, Stormblood, Metal Gear Solid Rising Revengeance.
Balsy 14? That doesn't exist anywhere as far as I know.
Well, maybe not canonically, but then again, what is canon in the series?
Oh, I get it now. You must have went to an altered dimension where Square Enix could count.
Yes. Well, number 11 doesn't exist anymore, so I get your point.
I'm sorry I have to be snarky about this, but 11 and 14 is something I really dislike for that particular reason. Because essentially it should be its own series, I think, rather than a part of the main series.
I'm going to say something bold and controversial, no doubt, but I think this is the best Final Fantasy game ever made. At least for me personally. And I realize that that controversial statement really isn't saying much. Or maybe it's saying too much, who can say. But yes, I enjoyed this game very much. One of the main reasons why I did it's because it reminded me very much of another JRPG that I deeply appreciated, which came out this year, and that would be Xenoblade Chronicles 2. It's also a game that I can't shut up about.
Of course.
In fact, I did not realize just how much Xenoblade Chronicles, in general, takes direct inspiration from MMORPGs, because it features all of the typical trappings of the genre. And Final Fantasy XIV plays like a more streamlined version of Xenoblade, in my estimation. For several reasons. For example, you know how you played Xenoblade Chronicles 2 first and foremost.
Yes, I have done. Yeah, for a little while, for a fair few hours, that's for sure.
I'm sure at some point you must have gotten frustrated in always getting jumped by that level 80 monkey monster in an area he has no business being in.
I try to avoid him as much as I can.
Unfortunately, if you quest, and you have to quest in order to get experience points, which is a typical trope of MMORPGs,
yeah,
the quests will inevitably take you to some areas that are populated by stronger monsters. And already that's a problem in its own right, because you get areas that are supposed to be up to your own level, but there are stronger monsters in there somehow. Such problem you don't encounter in Final Fantasy XIV. Every monster is in its own specific area. You have the level 1 monsters right around the initial town, and if you go further down into the territory, there are level 5, 6, 7, and so on and forth.
I see you eyeing up the Elvis haircut for a second.
Yes, I was really tempted to just have my character sporting that amazing pompadour. I will not go with the pompadour at the end because I was trying to actually like my character.
Oh, that's a new novel concept, isn't it?
Yes, after all, I am creating my character, which is another little thing that I appreciate about MMORPGs, because, hey, if you don't like the characters that RPGs are presenting to you, the authors of said RPGs have written for you, just create your own and come up with your own personality, so, you know, you have no reason to complain.
Original Final Fantasy OC, do not steal.
Indeed.
So
So Final Fantasy never really strikes me as a typical fantasy game series in the sense that there are no typical fantasy races.
Yeah, that's if you don't include the very first Final Fantasy game, which actually had those. Final Fantasy did start becoming much more interested in making its own races within its own fantasy logic, because the very first Final Fantasy game had the typical elves. You also had mermaids.
Mm-hmm.
I know one of the Final Fantasies, I know 4 for definite, had dwarves, but I'm just basically saying they did have the typical races in
yes,
the
but
much
the
earlier...
more we go on with the series, the less we have alternative to just human characters, as your playable characters at least.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy XIV is inhabiting a weird paradigm, with itself, because it's the least Final Fantasy-esque game ever made, because, again, by virtue of being an MMO, but at the same time, I have never seen any game in the main series with so much respect and passion for the franchise itself as this game has.
Yeah.
Which is a really bold statement if you consider how disastrous the official debut of this game was all the way back to a decade ago.
I actually do remember the absolute travesty that the original version of Final Fantasy XIV was. Not a lot of people really liked it that much,
yes,
to say the least.
It was especially egregious because you were supposed to pay to play this game, which already at the time was a outgoing business practice, and by the time we get to 2018, it's a business practice that has been dead for some time when it comes to MMORPGs. People just expect them to be free to play at this point. But I'll tell you what, I think spending $14 or euros, in my case, to play this game, the full version of this game, was worth it. Of course, I don't care about going further than that, buying all the expansions and whatnot, just so I can get to level 70. I don't need it. Level 50 is sufficient to cap off my character. By that point, I should have done all the main story quests and all the side stories relating to whatever class I've chosen.
Yeah.
And so on.
There was an interesting tidbit about, actually two interesting tidbits about the original version of Final Fantasy XIV that was done, essentially. Because once it gained bad notoriety and it was panned as an awful MMO at the time, the Square Enix actually went out of their way to apologize to literally everybody for the state it was in.
Imagine that, a gaming company, AAA, apologizing for bad behavior.
Now, at the time, Spoony basically made a big deal about that, and to be honest, I didn't really see why he should complain that they apologized. That's more than what most game companies are willing to do.
Yes, indeed. That reminds me of how the Spoony one tried to play this game and rage quit at the very first quest he was given.
Oh gosh.
That was funny. But anyway, so I can understand how this game's beginning might be extremely frustrating because it seems to... Well, you know what? I'll talk about the beginning once it gets shown in this video. Let's take that discussion and put it aside for the moment.
Yeah, there's a second thing I was going to say about the interesting development when it came to the original Final Fantasy XIV, because I believe, if I remember correctly, this whole Realm Reborn thing is actually very literal about what happened with the original Final Fantasy XIV, because I'm not sure how many people know of this, but definitely the diehard fans would know of this. But essentially, when they decided to shut down the original version of the game, there was a countdown, so to speak, in the form of an apocalypse that was going to destroy the world, and no one could do anything about it. And if the players stuck around until that very final moment, they would have seen a very special cutscene of that entire world being destroyed.
It's probably the same cutscene I have included at the very end of this video.
It might be, yes. And the fact they went all out to essentially bury the original version just so they could create this new version, which essentially...
It's only 5 years old.
Yes, which is only 5 years old. But still, it's considered the new version of Final Fantasy XIV at the time.
It's good.
What I'm saying.
It's really good. It has its problems, it has its trappings, but for the most part it feels like a more streamlined and playable version of most Final Fantasy games out there, even though it doesn't technically play like a traditional fantasy game. But then again, none of the modern Final Fantasy games play like a Final Fantasy game, so there is that. I'm saying Final Fantasy too many times!
Yes.
I mentioned how much this game respects the legacy of its own franchise, and it does so in many subtle ways. First off, the soundtrack is potent, magnificent. They brought back Nobuo Uematsu to compose the soundtrack, and it's made of mostly clever homages to classic tunes. For example, the first time you ride a airship in this game, they play a cover of the theme from Final Fantasy IV. That's nice.
That's very nice.
Hey, do you like riding chocobos? How would you like to own your own chocobo? To summon whenever you want? Eh? How would you like to have your chocobo to fight alongside you? That system could
cool.
use some tuning up, but nonetheless, the concept is fun.
It was actually something that they did in Final Fantasy Tactics, where you could ride a chocobo in a battle scenario.
Yes, but you can ride a chocobo everywhere in the world, so it's not even comparable.
The concept of riding a chocobo to battle is similar. That's all I'm saying.
And of course, they have recreated the entirety of the Gold Saucer from Final Fantasy VII, and it's a proper place you can visit and play a million minigames. And of course, they play the original tune from the Gold Saucer. Da 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 da. The very definition of an earworm. My most favorite aspect about the soundtrack is that this game features the best rendition of the classic Victory Fanfare.
Ooh.
First of all, you get the Victory Fanfare when you level up, which makes it the best level up ever.
Yes, it makes it sound awesome.
You also get that fanfare, but a different version of the fanfare, when you complete a guild hest or a dungeon, which are features of the game that you can do with other players. There are two versions, as I mentioned already. One is a epic orchestra. It's absolutely satisfying, but the second version, it's even better, because other than the powerful orchestra, you also have lyrics. And no, it's not the lyrics from Brental Floss's song, sadly. No, instead you have Gregorian chants. You just got Paul FTW. And it's the most satisfying, glamorizing version of that classic fanfare I've ever heard. And that makes the game 1,000 times better. Just by existing. Really, Yoshi P, the director of the new and improved Final Fantasy XIV, Realm Reborn, Stormblood, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, has done a fantastic job in saving this property from oblivion.
Yeah, which literally he calls it Oblivion.
Yes, well, sometimes you need an apocalypse in order for change to arise.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, the apocalypse is actually the premise of the main story of this game.
Yeah, I know about that much at least.
In fact, I am surprised how much single-player campaign storyline is included in this game, but then again, I am not all that familiar with MMORPGs, so I was not expecting to see such a focus on a single-player campaign narrative. Basically, you can play Final Fantasy XIV World of Warcraft A Realm in Crash Bandicoot like you would play the Elder Scrolls, when you go around and solve quests and get experience points, but again, it plays like a more streamlined and therefore much easier to get into version of either the Elder Scrolls or Xenoblade Chronicles 2. The quests on average take about 5 minutes to resolve and you get an appropriate amount of XPs. And there are several other ways to also level up if you run out of quests. Which almost never happens, but it might happen if you actually want to start a new class, because you can start a new class with your already existing character. To my understanding, something that doesn't happen often in MMOs.
Yeah.
You could do that. And when you start a new class, you might find yourself lacking quests to do because you've been doing them all for your original class.
Yeah.
There are ways around that as well. Quests that are related specifically to specific jobs and classes you're taking. And then there are duties and guild hests and dungeons, and once you reach level 10, many more possibilities are opened to you.
The only MMO I ever played, technically, was World of Warcraft with a couple of friends who basically just kind of forced me to play the game with them. So, never was a fan of MMOs. I mean, the only other MMO I played other than World of Warcraft was Ultima Online. And that was like the first of its kind in my country. So that was a bit of something that happened with me. So I had a bit of experience. I just never bothered with MMOs much because time and effort.
Yes, they are time consuming, and they can especially trap you into a tremendous and difficult circle of viciousness, if you will.
Yeah. I do have a lot of friends who play this particular online game right now, even, but...
Yes, well, listen, I think it's good. It's very polished because they have Square Enix backing it. And, oh wow, it's my character getting...
reborn?
I guess. You see, that's how kittens are born, Devar. They are a gift from the universe. Literally.